Hi, my name is Don Mason. I'm the journeyman bookbinder for Colonial Williamsburg. I've been a bookbinder for going on 7 years now. And being a bookbinder at Colonial Williamsburg, we interpret 18th century bookbinding overall, but we also interpret bookbinding throughout, throughout the time. It's a little bit different in Virginia for bookbinding as compared to Europe, but even the big cities of Philadelphia, Boston, New York. So much larger shops, places like Virginia, especially Williamsburg. Trade shops like binderies tend to be very small, kind of cottage type industry. The number of people working here will depend on the need. Normally we see no more than maybe a half a dozen bookbinders working in a shop like this, as opposed to the London binderies where you could have 100 or more. Pretty diverse group of people working in places, especially in the colonies. Men, women, children. Enslaved people bring a large part of the actual work here, with a population normally above 50% enslaved. So that makes the bulk of the labor, and it is slave labor. You definitely see women working here, so it runs the gamut. My colleague here, Barbara, she's my apprentice bookbinder, and she can tell you about herself.
All right. Hello. My name is Barb Swanson. I'm an apprentice bookbinder here, and I've been here for about 4 years now. And thanks to Dawn, I came here a different way. I actually come from a long line of printers and bookbinders, and my grandfather, especially, who I loved so much, was a printer. And he had a little shop up in New England, a little town called Revere, for a little while. And he bookbinded while my grandmother kept the accounts. And that would have been typical during this time period as well. So one of the first female printers in South Carolina, her name was Elizabeth Timothy, and her husband passed away, and she took over the Gazette down there and worked with Ben Franklin. And she actually wrote that it was quite customary for women and sons to work alongside their father, their husband. And so, yes, that's one of the biggest questions I get here is, would a woman be here? And I can tell you, yes, a woman would be here. And if you weren't a woman, say, of great repute, you didn't own the paper, you might work here sewing or maybe folding paper as a day laborer, and that is going to be quite possible too. And so welcome to our book bindery. We're really happy to be with you today and to field any questions that you all might have. Don? Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Barb and Don, for welcoming us into the book bindery today.
Thank you.
We want to start off by just asking, what are you working on today?
Doing something. Most of the time you have, you normally have maybe a half a dozen different projects, books that you're working on, because you'll get to an impasse with one, and then you just have to pick up on another. I'm doing a little bit of, I'm doing what's known as finishing. You have two major points of bookbinding. You have forwarding, which is the actual construction of the book, and then you have what's known as finishing, and that's doing the finishing touches like gold work, leather work, that sort of thing. So what I'm doing on this book currently is I want to do some decorative work on it, but before I can do that type of work, I need to kind of lay it out how I want to do it. So if you're doing just an everyday book, you can kind of let the eye guide the hand, and you can eyeball it basically. But if you're doing something that needs to be really nice, dividers and rulers and things like that, help. So right now what I'm doing is I'm just kind of coming up with a kind of design that I want to put in the book. So dividers help me just put a couple little tick marks in the leather to where when I take the tools that I use to do the tooling, and we can get into that if we do have questions about it, to do the decorative work on it. Barbara's doing them. Well, you tell them what you're doing.
I'm sewing books together. I'm sewing a book. It's going to be a blank book, which we would have done quite a bit of. And our particular one, sometimes what we do here as a trade shop is we do work for other trade shops. So I believe these are going to be going to the carpenters, and because they requested books, and you just put a request in with Don, and he does that. So let me show you a little bit of sewing. And I have to say, this is probably my favorite part of putting a book together. And I think you might find it tedious, though, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those things. I don't mind it, but there are things that are a little bit more exciting about it. Folding paper is not really one of them, but
No.
But tooling, I like to tool the leather. I also like to pare. Pare just simply means to thin it down, because the leather has to be thin before it's adhered to the book itself. But the book she's working on, blank books were pretty run-of-the-mill books in Virginia. It looks like because with a population enslaved and just few and far wealthy people around, the need for fancy books is a little bit limited here, but account books and ledgers and day books and waste books and ship's log books and receipt books. It's a credit economy in the 18th century, so they keep their records. You have to have something like a record book when somebody owes you money, or you have to go to court, or that sort of thing. So the book she's working on is I call it a little landscape book. It just opens from it's narrow, but it's kind of long, and it's really just going to be a little notebook so they can jot down things that they can remember and that sort of thing. So we see any number of those printed books, highly decorated, maybe something like the New York Conspiracy that was done here in the mid 1740s. This is not commonplace in Virginia. You would definitely see more stuff being done in London and Philadelphia and places like that. So a little bit different. But if they wanted printed books, they could surely get them. They would normally go to a store. The binders tended to work for a printer in Virginia anyway. So their customers would come into that store and then inquire about books, and then the bookbinder would be tasked to put the book together. So that's kind of what we're working on today. But yeah.
Excellent. So we've talked a little bit about the process of bookbinding. Bill was wondering, how long from start to finish would it usually take to bind a book?
Good question. I often tell people it's hours over days. Depending on what it is, it might only take you for obviously a fancy book like the one I showed you. It could take much longer. An everyday book this size used as an account ledger, I normally average, I don't know, maybe 10 to 12 hours spread out over, a few days. Today, we generally, once the book is complete, we like it to stay closed and we like it to rest for maybe, 2 weeks. The longer the better, because the book, when it's new, it has a tendency to want to, kind of want to open back up like this. So if you can put that under weight, you can put it into a standing press or what they call a nipping press that's normally on a big table. If you can put a little bit of pressure on it and let it sit for a week or two, that's going to help with the boards to stay down. But we've seen fancy books can take months, better part of a year to do. But those are pretty rare. I do know of a fancy book that was done in the early 20th century the two binders, Sandgorski and Sutcliffe in London. They did a jeweled binding known as the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and they worked on that book for about 17 months before it was completed. So, but normally hours over days is the time on it.
And to add to that, so as an apprentice, I can say that when I first came here, I made folders, and I think I made 13 folders over the course of a whole year. So, but you're learning all the different parts of putting a book together, and that's 28 steps. So what you're doing as an apprentice is you're working to just get faster at your craft and better as you go. I think in the 18th century standards, they're going to be focusing on getting it out the door pretty quickly. Definitely. So I'm a little better now. Money. Yes, yeah. I'm a little better now. I think it takes me about a week and a half to put a book together. So you can kind of see how far you've come from the beginning to 4 years in. So.
Great. So now having covered maybe a little bit about sort of how long it would take and really what you're producing here in the shop, maybe this would be a great opportunity to dive deeper into the types of materials you use in your work. In fact, Brandon actually had a specific question about what your glue was made out of.
Good question.
Good question. There are various things that we're getting blue, like the color blue, I assume.
Glue?
So,
glue.
Glue as an adhesive. Okay, I thought you were talking about blue as in a color. Thanks. We could talk about that as well.
We could.
But as far as glue, the main adhesive that we use in bookbinding even today is very simple. It's paste. It's flour and water. So if you take a small amount of flour, basically 6 to 1, six parts water, 1 part flour, you put it into a saucepan and you heat it up. And when it comes to a boil, you let it go for, I don't know, half a minute or so and cool it off. And what it makes is, I have paste right here, matter of fact, and if I can find a brush. Never can find a brush when you need one. But everybody has seen paste. It's nothing but thick, kind of gravy-like material, and it's literally the best adhesive. And we use it primarily to put the leather on the book. We also use it to if we're doing paper on the outside of the book, like this one. That's nothing but flour and water paste holding that on there. And once it's dry, it'll hold the leather on the book for the life of the skin. Other adhesives that we use, most people are familiar with hide glues, gelatins. We don't use a lot of it. We do use it for one thing for the most part. So after Barbara is finished sewing this, when we go to do what's known as rounding and backing, we put a little bit of hide glue on the spine of the book to keep the pages from moving on you. So you want that glue to get down in between the signatures or the sections, but the bulk of the glue will be removed once that's done. The only other adhesive that we use is known as glare. You know it as egg white. So we use egg white or glare for gold tooling or gold finishing. So, a book like The New York Conspiracy that was done here, it has this gold work. So think of the egg glare or the egg albumen, think of it as a heat-activated glue. So when you run the decorative tool, over the gold, what it's going to do is it's going to liquefy that glare and then immediately solidify it. And what it does is it leaves the gold down into the pattern of the tool. And once that happens, there's no it's there. So paste, a little bit of hide glue, and egg glare. That's our three main ones.
Excellent. And here's a question that might actually help us get to the color blue.
Okay.
We've had some curiosity. We've had some curiosity about the marbling process and how often books would have actually been marbled.
Well, the interesting thing about marbling is, and if for the viewers that are not familiar with what we're talking about, marbled paper, not to be confused with paste paper. So paste paper is this stuff here that you see, and it's made with this. You just put a dye into the paste, and then brush it on, and then take a comb. Marbled paper is a whole different, kettle of fish.
Whole trade in itself.
Yeah, it's a whole trade by itself, because most people think this would be a bookbinder's trade. Traditionally, it's not. Today, bookbinders will do it, but it's interesting. I still import today for Colonial Williamsburg when I need marble paper. I still import it from a paper marbler in England. Gemma Lewis is her name, but so that's her trade. So how I learned bookbinding, she would have served an apprenticeship in England, learning how to do nothing but decorative paper. So they would import most of it, and it's a watercolor process. So taking various colors to include blue, red, all the colors that you can think of. Most of the time, the reds are coming from something known as carmine or cochineal. It's a desiccated bug. Blue tends to be, blue can be really expensive. Red can as well. A lot of times they're getting blues from, they definitely can get it from indigo, and then they'll create what's known as Prussian blue, which was by accident actually. But the real fine blue is something known as lapis. Lapis is crazy expensive even today. It's about $30,000 a kilo the last time I checked. So that's quite expensive. So
Won't be using much of that
we don't
here.
use no. lapis lazuli in Colonial Williamsburg bindery. They would probably not like me if I spent that kind of money. But yes, separate trade. I don't see a lot of marbled paper on books in Williamsburg. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It does. We definitely see this more common. Did they produce it here? I think they probably did, but they could also import this as well. And this is commonly known as Dutch paste paper. For some reason, they liked the Dutch papers the best, and I think the English papers were a close second. It looks like, as far as the decorative papers.
So going along the lines of importing materials, maybe you could speak a little bit about how the binders would have acquired the materials necessary for your job in the 18th century, here in Williamsburg, that is.
Did you want to take that, or you want me to do it?
Yeah, I can do some,
All
I
right.
think. So what we really say is we import everything. So, and feel free to, so we are going to put the book together, but the paper is coming through England. It can be made in any of the countries, and the tools are going to be made specifically in England and shipped over. And so I would be hard pressed to say of many bookbinding tools who are actually produced here in the colonies. What would you?
As far as the books go, I would think that things that are printed, that are high end, you don't have a large demand for those in places like Williamsburg and in Virginia, because most people are relatively poor. The professional people and the wealthy people that would buy poetry and novels, and sure, they have them. But I think a printer in Virginia would probably, if he went to print a novel and have it bound, I think he'd probably lose his, he'd lose his shirt pretty quick. But they can import things. So publishing houses in England and Europe, you can get things. I think where we fall into it, as far as would be the account book, the ledger, because do you want to import an account book where it's going to take you months to get it as opposed to days? I think that's the difference. We do see some high-end work in Virginia and Williamsburg. especially this book, The New York Conspiracy. That's kind of interesting because it's written by a fellow up in New York. It's a true story, and we know it was bound here. So was the text printed in New York? Could have been printed in London and then shipped down here for a binder here to do it. We know it was done here. Was it printed here? To my knowledge, no. So we're getting our supplies and things from all over the world, but we also are getting things from here as well. But exotic leathers like goat skins, they're coming from North Africa, Turkey. You do see us getting some paper once the war starts. Obviously, you're not getting paper and all your supplies from around the world, so it's going to be really tough for them once they get into the war years to get the supplies they need. So it's really tough for printers and bookbinders because they run out of paper, they run out of leather, they run out of simple things. So we're getting it from everywhere.
Great. Now, Dawn was wondering, going along the lines of these ledger books, how accessible would they have been to the general public here in Virginia? Were they an expensive commodity?
Books are expensive. If you take into account in the 1760s here in Virginia, a piece of writing paper, about the same size as a piece of writing paper today, it's one penny or one English penny, which basically translates to that's what a farmer would make after working an hour. So you can imagine, do you want to spend an hour's wage on a sheet of paper? So maybe just a plain book like this one here, just what it has in paper and leather. This book to that same farmer could be somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 15 to 20 days wages for, just for that one book. And it's a blank book. It's not anything fancy. Fancy books like, printed books, Bibles, music books, they run the gamut and they can be much more expensive. But sometimes the larger the book, the more material you have, that could make it. So, for example, if I've got a large ledger that's meant to go up on a table, that could be more expensive than a smaller printed book. So they're not going to be financially available to everyday people for the most part. Now, pamphlets and things like that, they're a little bit more affordable. But even a pamphlet could be anywhere between a half a day and a day's wage for most people in Virginia. Now, to the rich guy, it's not a problem. Professional people, if they own a business, they're going to transfer the cost over to the customer. So they are expensive, and they will remain expensive until post-Civil War in the United States with wood paper coming into play. So by the 1870s, 1880s, the price of books have become very affordable, very cheap in quality, but also in the price. So that ushers in the dime novel and things like that. So very expensive at this time.
Now, Franklin was wondering if there would have been any relationship to the sizes of books or the functions of books as they pertained to gender in the 18th century, sort of with this idea that perhaps smaller journals spoke to the privacy of female writing at that time, or if you had any type of insight into these relationships in the 18th century.
I don't know.
That's a good question.
It's interesting to think about, though.
I never thought about it. I would say this. I think the size of a book, we do know that the smaller book is the more popular book, because the large ledgers, they're fairly large. They're not made to carry around, but something small like this, pamphlets are very small. So this one that she has right here, that's about the size of an almanac. So you can put it into your pocket. We do know the biggest selling book is what we call a duodecimo, which is about that size right there. Could be a little bit bigger, but they normally don't get much bigger than that. You normally don't see people walking around with a book even this size, but this wasn't unpopular either. As far as small, we do see women of certain statures. Do they have diaries and personal books and things? Surely they do. In Virginia, I think it's going to be somewhat limited, just because most people are working. They're not, it's mostly agrarian, so rich people have time to sit around and carry books, but a lot of times they would have the almanac bound, and they could keep it in their pocket and have a little extra paper.
They have extra pages put in there. And I've looked through several almanacs from the Rockefeller Library. This is 1749, and you're able to read the notes in there that people kept. So there was this one gentleman who really liked horse racing, for instance. So I get to see all his notes on the various horses that had run the races and won, and that was kind of fun to look at. He liked wind speed, and he drew maps. So this is definitely going to be a diary type thing for men as well as for females. So.
Super. Now, Carla was wondering sort of the relationship that a book bindery or a printer would have had with local institutions, specific to, say, the College of William and Mary. Would it have been a situation where the college would order books from you?
I wouldn't rule it out. Most of the time, it looks like the binders in Williamsburg, they tended to work for whoever the head printer was. So most of the time, the head printer, he or she, is the kind of wearer of many hats. So they would normally be they publish the newspaper. They're the government, the public printer in most cases. A lot of times they're the postmaster. So I think their bread and butter for the most part would be the government contracts, and so they produce books for the church. A lot of that would be blank books, books to keep records, marriages, deaths, baptisms, the account book for the church, you're fined if you don't attend the church on a regular basis. So the clerk of that church, he needs a blank book. The government down at the end of the street. Now, as far as the college goes, it looks like the instructors would have an allocation of books, but I can't find anything where the binders or the printers are supplying like textbooks or things like that to the college. I just haven't found it. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but don't think of the College of William and Mary as this big university. It tends to be more of a very small number of students, could be less than a dozen some years, and it's normally prepping young wealthy gentlemen to go into the church for the most part. So at this time, it doesn't look like William and Mary has like much of a curriculum from the standpoint of you get a degree, but I think what they would probably do for instruction books and things like that, they probably just order those in, and they would go through the guy that runs the printing store to do that. But did he supply them with blank books for record keeping? I'm pretty sure they did. So.
Excellent. Now, unfortunately, our time is coming close to an end here, but we do have time for one last question. And what we'd like to do is ask about maybe a favorite project that you've had since you've started working for the foundation. Maybe you could share some of those thoughts with us.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So, I'm here because I have very generous donors, and they actually contributed my apprenticeship here. So whenever I get to make a book for them, it's a good day. And they're in town today. I get to see them after I see all of you. And so I've prepared some books for them. I hope they're not watching. It's supposed to be a surprise. So it's this one here, and it's an almanac, which I went to Rockefeller and I measured, and I really tried to stay true to what the book was like. And this one, and another one for them. This is probably my favorite book I've ever done. It's the first time that I gold tooled a book, so you can kind of see the art of defense on there. And this is actually my favorite design right here. So kind of reminds me of an envelope, and I like that. It also has marbled end papers, which I hadn't done that many of those before this. So I guess I'm probably really proud of these two, and I'm proud to be able to give them to people who really blessed me. So those are my two.
As far as a special type of book or project that I've worked on in the last 7 years or so, last year I had the opportunity. We had a colleague of ours that worked here for many years. He was retiring and wanted to do a book for him. So I actually, in a short period of time, I tooled a 18th century book. It's a large book, a music book known as The Musical Entertainer, George Bickham's Entertainer,
It was beautiful,
1730. So it had a lot of gold on it, but it was going to a really good colleague and friend of ours, and that was last year. The other one is I've had a chance to reproduce this book here, and it's a charter book for the College of William and Mary, dated 1736. It's in Latin and English, and this is what it looked like. And it was done here. Several of them were done here. Most of them ended up going to England, and then the college actually has a 1736 copy of it, so I've been able to take a look at it and get it printed up. So currently I'm working on another one of these, and I attended the College of William and Mary many years ago, so it's kind of neat to connect that with the book and be able to reproduce it. So between those two, those are the ones that stand out. So most definitely.
Well, thank you so much, Barb and Don, for welcoming us
Thank
into
you.
your shop today. We do want to finish up, though, by taking this opportunity to thank our donors. Programs like this are made possible by the generous support of viewers like you. And to learn more about how you can contribute to our programming, please follow the link in the comment section or visit our website at www.colonialwilliamsburg.org. Barb and Don, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with today?
Really just thank you. I would like to say that our little shop has been closed, and we are at the museum on Tuesdays all day, and that has been wonderful to get out and to get to see all of you coming to visit us and wishing us well, and we miss being with you. So thank you for your support. We love you. We're grateful for you, and stay safe. That is my thing. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, I would just like to say we're looking forward to having guests come back and visit our
Absolutely.
shop, because that's what we're here for.
Yes.
So we are looking forward to getting guests back into the bindery. And like I said, we are over at the Art Museum once a week, but it's a little bit different. So we enjoy that, but we are looking forward to having guests come in. So. We hope that's soon.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Definitely.
thanks again.
Thank you.